All right, welcome everyone. My name is Daniel Parker. I am one of the assistant directors on the special education team at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here today to our webinar on comprehensive special education evaluation. It's an overview part 1. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan Friedel to do some introductions for us.
Thank you, Daniel. First, we would like to thank the Wisconsin Statewide Parent-Educator Initiative, WISPE, for supporting our Zoom platform for our COP meetings. WISPE is supported through a Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction grant to promote and enhance family engagement statewide. WISPE provides a variety of supports to both families and educators to build strong relationships and effective partnerships. WISPE services are free of charge to anyone in Wisconsin, and we thank them for their support.
Today, I will just kind of jump in here. Our learning objectives today will be that participants will be looking at our relevance and our rationale for the development of a comprehensive special education evaluation framework. We're going to talk a little bit about what is meant by a comprehensive special education evaluation. We're going to talk about the importance of adopting a needs versus label mindset. We want to go ahead and address any potential bias throughout the evaluation process, and we're going to share a collection of resources developed by Dr. Marquita Newell for us here at DPI that kind of walks us through addressing bias in the evaluation process. And then we're going to end with just thinking a little bit about how the session content may be applied to your role in special education evaluation. On October 5th, we're going to do part 2. We have a series of additional objectives for that, which are going to cover other pieces of our framework. I want to quickly just acknowledge the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's honor of the inherent sovereignty of each of the American Indian nations of Wisconsin. Wherever you are in Wisconsin, the land we are on here for today's event is that of the indigenous nations who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. The DPI will continue to cultivate and maintain our ongoing relationships with our Wisconsin American Indian nations. There's some great resources on this slide. I want to direct folks to the DPI American Indian Studies program, where there are maps of the indigenous tribal nations within Wisconsin, and there's additional resources that I would encourage you to check out, linked to this slide to learn more. Today's presentation covers the following high leverage practices in special education. Collaborating with professionals to increase student success, using multiple sources of information to develop a comprehensive understanding of a student's strengths and needs, interpret and communicate assessment information with stakeholders to collaboratively design and implement educational programs, and use student assessment data, analyze instructional practices, and make necessary adjustments that improve student outcomes. And
it is good.
Megan, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, our one of our co-hosts today.
Thank you, Daniel. It is good to remind ourselves that as educators, we must ground all of our work within an equity framework. Doing this ensures every student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and/or family income. Grounding all of our work within an equity framework includes how we identify students with disabilities. When thinking of educational equity, please take a moment to frame our conversation today on the following key points. What actions are we taking to better serve the most under-resourced and inequitably served students and families? Providing what students need when they need it is an especially acute challenge for students of color and students with disabilities. For decades, we have been aware of the disproportionate disability identification of certain groups of students. We also know that many of these students are more often removed from general education instruction and have worse educational outcomes than their white peers without IEPs. When students receive special education services, they do not, i.e., are inaccurately evaluated or identified, or receive special education services that are ineffective. They are not getting what they need when they need it. This is what we mean by being under-resourced and inequitably served. When we have a focus on equity, we push back on individual and system biases and stereotypes that affect educational decision-making, and for each student, ask ourselves, are the educational services being provided what this student needs to be successful? We also want to maintain and deepen relationships with students, families, and colleagues, collaborate in decision-making based on individual student and family needs, and then finally, continue to take care of yourself. I'll hand it over to Paula and Daniel.
All right. This is Daniel Parker again, one of the assistant directors on the special education team at DPI. We're going to start out by talking about the relevance of and rationale for the development of the comprehensive special education evaluation framework. And it's my great pleasure to introduce my co-presenter for this section, Paula Volpiansky.
My name is Paula Volpiansky, and I've been with the department for quite a few years, and I'm very happy to be here today. So I'm going to do a little bit of background, and oh my goodness, I've just turned around these. Let's see if I can get it back. Okay. So the two requirements that you see on the screen, FAPE, or Free Appropriate Public Education, and Child Find, are at the very core of IDEA, the Individuals with Students with Disabilities Act, and the reason that we have special education evaluations. The first, FAPE, or Free Appropriate Public Education, must be made available to all children residing in the state between the ages of 3 to 21, including children with disabilities who've been suspended or expelled from school. This means that every student must have access to a free and appropriate public education. And as you will be able to see later, the term appropriate is very important here. The second, Child Find, is the legal basis for the special ed evaluation process and procedures. Child Find is the process by which school districts ensure that they have identified every student who may need special education in order to receive a free appropriate public education, or FAPE as we nicely call it. So LEAs, or school districts, must ensure that all resident students who have not graduated with a regular high school diploma and who may need special education related services are identified, located, and evaluated according to, in accordance with federal law. So Endrew versus the Endrew F. Supreme Court case. This is another foundational piece of information for you. This important Supreme Court decision redefined the IDEA meaning of free appropriate public education. It clarified that physical access to a public education is not enough. An educational program for a student with a disability must provide more than just minimal education benefit. In its decision, the Supreme Court declared that an IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable a student to make progress in light of the student's circumstance. To accomplish this, the effects of the student's disability and disability-related needs must be clearly identified and understood. A comprehensive special education evaluation is the mean by which the student's strengths and needs are identified so that an IEP can be developed to provide FAPE as defined in Endrew F. So Endrew F significantly refocused our efforts. But even before the 2017 decision, DPI had already renewed its efforts on the behalf of educational equity for students with IEPs. Over the past decade and working with various stakeholder groups, the department has published numerous updates to guidance related to clarifying its roles and responsibilities of local education agencies, which in Wisconsin includes public schools, 2R, 2X, charter schools as well. But to clarify the roles of LEAs as they provide students with a free, appropriate public education. Some examples include, that are on this slide, include guidance on developing college and career-ready individual education programs, and most recently, a bulletin on special education evaluation, which is Information Update 2101. This latter bulletin sets the groundwork for the comprehensive special education framework guidance, which we are going to start to tell you about during webinar 1 today. The development of the guidance related to conducting special ed evals is particularly timely right now, as OSEP has reminded states that regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic or the modes of instruction provided during the pandemic, students with disabilities are still entitled to FAPE. And furthermore, OSEP reaffirmed that the importance of appropriate implementation of child-find obligations, including the implementation of special education evaluations that meet all of the IDEA requirements. This slide says that given the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, as they prepare to return to full-time in-person learning, SEAs, meaning the state, and LEAs, meaning districts, may need to evaluate whether their current child-find procedures are sufficiently robust to ensure appropriate referral and evaluation of children who may have a disability under IDEA. So many folks anticipated increase in special ed referrals as a result of the disruptions to learning and the negative effects on the mental health that some students have experienced while schools were mostly closed to in-person learning last school year. School districts are going to need to take care to resist identifying these students as eligible for special education when the reason for their academic or functional skill regression is due to the effects of the pandemic, such as school closures, family illness or loss, etc., rather than a disability that results in a need for special ed. The pandemic has made the timing of our release of the updated special education evaluation guidance particularly relevant. The guidance on special ed evaluation should help IEP teams that you participate on make sound decisions about special education and eligibility and student needs while taking into consideration factors related to each student's pandemic experience. And finally, the last idea I'm going to share, an important concept. We'd like to draw your attention to something that you may have seen already if you've been around. These are the 5 beliefs that are the core of the college and career ready IEP process. They're also core beliefs for special education evaluation. These beliefs are essential to conducting evaluations that provide the information necessary to develop IEPs that promote college and career readiness. Of particular importance are culturally responsive practices and collective responsibility. A comprehensive evaluation depends on all IEP team members, special educators, general educators, family members, related service personnel, and the students themselves when they are involved, and LEA representatives, as well as others who interact with the student. It's at the basis of them asking questions and sharing important information and interpreting existing and new data with the awareness and respect for the student and the family, and to get more information. So we're going to share a bit more about how to ensure evaluations are culturally responsive and non-discriminatory a bit later when Tim and Andrea share information about our new resources on bias in evaluation. For more information about the IEP, CCR IEP beliefs, you can just click on the blue wording, which has a link to that document. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Daniel.
All right, thank you, Paula. To kind of wrap up why and the rationale around updating the evaluation framework, Paula mentioned previously that for a number of years, about 5 years, we have had a redesign and renewed focus on IEP development, our College and Career Ready IEP, CCR IEP 5-step process, and the 5 beliefs. And as we were going out and providing professional development like this, either in webinars or going out to conferences and doing workshops, we worked very closely with our regional special education network, the RSN, and each of the cooperative educational service agencies around the state. They are still providing very high quality CCR IEP guidance to school teams on how to develop IEPs that both meet the legal requirements and that are going to maximize the best outcomes for students. Well, as we were doing those trainings, we would often get questions when we're talking about root cause analysis and identifying disability-related needs, or even at step 1, when we're trying to think about what are the age or grade level academic and functional expectations of a student, that some of those root cause analysis discussions to identify disability-related needs were difficult for IEP teams because they didn't always have the most detailed, concise, meaningful, and relevant data in front of them. And so one of the reasons for updating our framework is, as we were doing those trainings, we realized that there really was a need to also provide additional guidance and support around the requirements of a comprehensive special education evaluation. As you will see in this presentation, one of the big hangups people would get stuck on is the difference between a disability label and a disability-related need. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But they are different concepts, and sometimes when they're thought of as one thing, the evaluation is not comprehensive, the IEP development is not addressing all of the needs, and students don't always get what they need in their special education program to be successful. So the CCR IEP process really informed that we should take a look at our guidance around evaluation and really try to think about how are we going to move away from a disability category label-based process where people just look at the criteria to determine if a student is eligible for special education without thinking more comprehensively, which, as we will see, is a requirement of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We did a lot of testing out of the framework that you are going to hear about in this part 1 and part 2. It started with the CCR IEP trainings from 2016 through 2020. We pulled together a work group in summer of 2018. We started doing presentations on pieces of the framework about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I suppose. And we engaged a lot of our discretionary grants at DPI, including the Regional Special Education Network, amongst others. We went to various conferences that you can see here. We presented in front of leadership conference to special education directors around the state. And we had a fairly robust stakeholder meeting in 2019 where we had a cross-section of various roles: principals, general education teachers, related service professionals, pupil services, higher education, and I'm sure I'm missing other groups, but we really wanted a cross-section of roles. We had a geographically and racially diverse stakeholder group, about 35, 40 people, who really provided a lot of input in fleshing out the details of what we are presenting here today and in October, and that you'll find on our new comprehensive special education webpage. So thank you to all the stakeholders and everyone who's been in previous workshops and trainings for providing your feedback to get us to where we are today. The framework is, as Paula said, kind of rooted in special education, state and federal requirements. An extensive bulletin was developed, 2101. We wanted to get that bulletin out before we provided additional kind of guidance and support on how and what comprehensive special education evaluation looks like. We did a webinar a little while back on that presentation. We are going to post that recording, but you will see that bulletin is very robust and has a lot of the legal requirements and question and answers that you may be seeking. We have a number of frameworks guidance documents on our Comprehensive Special Education Framework webpage. And we have additional resources such as addressing bias in a comprehensive special education evaluation, a set of resources you'll hear about today. And then we have a whole bunch of other topics that are in development. The bulletin goes through general provisions, obligations related to conducting special ed evaluations, the evaluation process. It talks a little bit about special education evaluation and IEP development, special education within an school district's equitable multi-level system of support, and then reevaluation questions. The Comprehensive Special Education webpage is currently broken into an overview that includes a really beautiful process chart. You're going to hear about that in part 2 webinar. There's a document on comprehensive special education evaluation with an equitable multi-level system of support. We worked with our Wisconsin RTI Center in development of that, so thank you to our Wisconsin RTI Center. Comprehensive special education evaluation, why it matters. Really working on that mindset. We're going to cover that today. And then in part 2 of our webinar, we're going to get into those 6 areas of academic and functional skill to help guide and plan evaluations, as well as there's also a section on related legal citations. There's a lot of additional content that we're going to develop as part of this framework. If there are areas here that you see that you would like us to focus on, I encourage you to put it in the chat. We are about halfway through a conducting observations set of resources. We are about to publish some resources on types of assessments and strategies and tools. We will be releasing these slide decks. We have some almost ready to release some guidance on trauma in special education. We get special education evaluations. We get a lot of questions about that, as well as determining the need for specially designed instruction. If you saw the updated ER1 form, there's a lot of questions about making sure students need specially designed instruction to be eligible for having special education services. So we're providing additional resources on that. And then there's some other areas that we're going to go deeper on throughout the school year that you can see listed on this slide.